Nat's True Crime Podcast, and I'm going to talk about Theodore Robert Cowell, born on November 24th, 1946, in Burlington, Vermont. Ted Bundy. Theodore Robert Bundy, aka Ted Bundy, was a serial killer who murdered 30 young girls in the 1970s in the United States. He was famed for his charm and charisma, and he would use the ruse of an injury to lure women to his vehicle. Ted Bundy drove a Volkswagen Beetle or a station wagon and would hit women from behind and put them into his car to kill at another location. Ted Bundy returned to the crime scene on many occasions to engage in sexual activity with them, as he was a necrophile. How many people did Ted Bundy kill? The number of murders Bundy confessed to were 30. Most of them were identified, but the exact number of women he may have murdered and Ted Bundy's body count is unknown due to unsolved cases in the areas he operated in. Ted Bundy had an IQ of 124 and was said to be very intelligent. The execution of Ted Bundy was by the electric chair, and he died on January 24th, 1989. Ted Bundy doesn't have a grave. He was cremated and scattered at Cascade Range, Washington. Ted Bundy's victims, Washington and Oregon. Ted Bundy assaulted Karen Fox at the University of Washington in January 1974. He broke into her apartment and assaulted her with a metal bar, leaving her in a coma for 10 days. She survived the attack by Bundy. The Ted Bundy murders took place across a number of states from 1974 to 1978. Linda Ann Haley was murdered in January 1974. The police discovered blood-stained bedding and clothing in her dorm room. She was dressed by Bundy and carried her from her room to her burial site. Her skull was discovered on Taylor Mountain, close to Issaquah, in March 1975 by forestry students who were surveying the area. She had been beaten to death. Donna Gail Manson was murdered by Ted Bundy in March 1974 after she left to meet with friends at a local concert, but was never seen again. Bundy confessed to her murder, and he claimed he took her body to the Taylor Mountain burial, but her remains were never found. Susan Elaine Ringcourt was murdered in April 1974 after she left a meeting to meet a friend. Her fractured skull was discovered on Taylor Mountain close to Issaquah in March 1975 by forestry students who were surveying the area. Roberta Kathleen Parks was murdered in May 1974 after she left her university dorm to meet friends but never arrived. Her skull and lower jaw were discovered on Taylor Mountain close to Issaquah in March 1975 by forestry students who were surveying the area. Brenda Carol Ball was murdered in May of 1974 after leaving a local bar. She was last seen talking to a man with his arm in a sling in a tavern car park. Her skull and lower jaw was discovered on Taylor Mountain close to Issaquah in March of 1975 by forestry students who were surveying the area. Dawn Hawkins was murdered in June 1974 after leaving her boyfriend's dorm room. Bundy claimed her remains were at a burial site close to Lake Sammamish State Park. Janice Inhofe was murdered in July 1974. She disappeared from Lake Sammamish State Park after helping a man with his arm in a sling. Her remains were found in September of 1994 at a burial site close to Lake Sammamish State Park. Denise Marie Naslund was murdered in July 1974. She disappeared just 4 hours after he took Janice Orphan. She was taken from the Lake Sammamish State Park after leaving her friends to use a bathroom. Her remains were found in September of 1974 at a burial site close to Lake Shamama State Park. Ted Bundy's victims: Utah, Colorado, and Idaho, 1974. Nancy Wilcox was murdered in October 1974 after last being seen in Ted Bundy's car. Bundy confessed to assaulting and strangling her. He gave a vague description of where he buried her, but her remains have never been located. Melissa Ann Smith was murdered in October 1974 after going missing when walking home after meeting a friend. Her body was found 9 days later in the Wasatch Mountains. She had been severely beaten and sexually assaulted. Laura and Amy were murdered in October 1974 after leaving a Halloween party early to walk to a local park. Her body was found a month later by hikers in the Wasatch Mountains outside a cave that would become known as Ted Bundy Cave. She had been severely beaten and sexually assaulted. Ted Bundy later confessed that he had kept her in the cave for a number of days and had revisited the site. Carol DeAnge was approached by Ted Bundy in a shopping mall in November of 1974. He told her that her car had been broken into and that she needed to go with him to the police station. She was able to escape to a nearby road where she ran into the path of a local couple who took her to a police station. Carol DeAnge, who the first survivor of Ted Bundy abduction. Deborah Kent was murdered by Ted Bundy in November of 1995 after leaving a high school play to pick up her younger brother. Screams were heard and a Volkswagen Bug was seen racing from the scene. A key was found at the crime scene that matched the handcuffs from Carol's failed abduction. Her body was never found. Karen Campbell was murdered in January 1976. She disappeared from a inn on vacation in Colorado. Her body was found 36 later in the snow along a dirt road nearby. She had been beaten and slashed. Julie Cunningham was murdered in March of 1975 after leaving her home to meet a friend. Her body was never found at the location. Bundy told the police he had left it. Bundy told investigators that he had approached her on crutches before beating and strangling her. Denise Lynn Olafson was murdered in April of 1995 after cycling to her parents' house following an argument with her husband. Her body was never found, but her bike and shoes were found under a bridge. Bundy claimed he threw her body into the Colorado River after off the same bridge. Lynette Cover was murdered in May 1975. Bundy confessed to her murder and threw her body into the Snake River, but her remains were never found. Susan Curtis disappeared during a conference at Brigham Young University in June 1975. Bundy confessed to her murder and claimed he buried her in Utah, but her remains were never found. Ted Bundy victims, Florida. Margaret Elizabeth Bowman was murdered in her Chi Omega dorm room in January 1978. She had been beaten and strangled while she slept. Lisa Levy was murdered in her Chi Omega dorm room in January 1978. She had been strangled and sexually assaulted. Ted Bundy left behind evidence in this murder, a bite mark, which led to his murder conviction and eventual execution. Karen Chandler was assaulted in her dorm room in January of 1978. She had a fractured skull and jaw, broken teeth, and a number of other wounds. Karen Chandler survived the attack by Bundy. Kathy Kleiner was assaulted in her Chi Omega sorority dorm room in January 1978. She was asleep at the time of the attack and had a broken jaw, teeth, and had been stabbed in the face. Kathy Kleiner survived the attack by Bundy. Cheryl Thomas was assaulted in her bedroom in January 1978. She had been severely beaten and spent a month in hospital. Cheryl Thomas survived the attack by Bundy and had lasting injuries from the attack. Kimberly Diane Leach was murdered in February 1978 after being seen leaving school with a man who her remains were later found near Swanee River State Park. Confections and conjecture. The night before his execution, Ted Bundy finally confessed to the murders of more than 30 women. Ted Bundy's crime scene photos showed bloody scenes and led to suspicions that he may have committed some of the murders below. Emily Cooley was murdered in April 1975, and her body was discovered 2 weeks later. She had been beaten and strangled. Bundy was in the local area when she disappeared. The local authorities don't have enough conclusive evidence, and the scene is listed as a cold case. Shelley Robinson was murdered in July 1975, and her body was found in August. Bundy was in the local area when she disappeared. However, the local authorities do not have enough conclusive evidence, and the case is listed as a cold case. Susan Davis and Elizabeth Perry were stabbed in May 1969. Bundy was in the local area and had confessed to killing 2 women in the area. However, the case remains open. Ted Bundy is suspected of a number of other crimes. The murder of Anne Marie Berg in 1961, when he was just 14 years old. However, Bundy refuted that claims many times, and there is no scientific evidence to link him to the crime. Rita Curran was murdered in her home and was strangled, beaten, and sexually assaulted. Furthermore, he knew the area, and at the time, nobody knows where he was. The case is unsolved, but a FBI detective believes he is responsible. Lisa Wick and Lonnie Turnbull were flight attendants who were beaten with a long length of wood while they slept in June 1966. Lonnie died, and Lisa has no memory of the event. Bundy is tried with the case due to similarities to the sorority house attack. In addition to the above, Bundy remains a suspect in the murders of Joyce LePage, Rita Jolly, Vicki Haller, Catherine Mary Devine, and Sandra Jean Weaver. Arrests, escapes, and trials. When he was first arrested, they were a lot of thought from friends and family that Ted Bundy was innocent, and it was a case of mistaken identity. Ted Bundy was jailed for 15 years in July of 1975 for kidnapping and attempted assault of Carol Daranch. He was initially pulled over for a traffic violation. Upon checking the vehicle, police discovered Ted Bundy had a murder kit containing a hacksaw, crowbar, and hicks. Police linked the use of handcuffs to Carroll's attempted kidnapping. Carroll later picked him out of the police lineup. This arrest made him to suspect in a number of murders because credit card statements had placed him in the area. He was charged with Karen Campbell's murder in October 1976 and transferred to a jail in Aspen. Bruce Lubeck was Ted Bundy's defense lawyer and initially believed him innocent, and it was a case of mistaken identity. Ted served as his own lawyer during the Bundy trial, which gave him the opportunity to escape. Ted Bundy first escaped was achieved by jumping out of the Pickens Courthouse Law Library in January 1977. Bundy was recaptured a week later after being spotted by 2 police officers. Ted Bundy underwent weight loss to help him escape a second time in December of 1977. He had lost enough weight to slip through a light fitting in the ceiling. He changed into plain clothes and walked out of the front of the prison and down to the train station. Ted was immediately placed on the FBI 10 most wanted list. Ted Bundy fled to Florida State, where he used a fake name and rented an apartment funded by stolen credit cards. After the sorority house murders, he went on the run and was arrested for driving a stolen car and possessing a stolen driving license. Ted Bundy was charged with the attack on the Chi Omega house due to a bite mark he had left on one of the bodies. Following his arrest, Bundy called his girlfriend Elizabeth Klepfer, aka Elizabeth Kendall, and confessed his crimes to her. Trials. Ted Bundy went on trial for the sorority murders in June 25th, 1979. He was found guilty due to the bite mark evidence and witness testimony. Bundy was given 2 death sentences. Later in January 1980, he was given a third death sentence after being found guilty of Kimberly Leach's murder. The issue had been raised many times, and the question has been asked, was Ted Bundy a psychopath? He was interviewed by Harvey Cleckley, was part of the prosecution. Harvey gave Ted Bundy the diagnosis of a psychopath, as did Bundy defense. During his Florida trial in 1986, his defense attorney Paula Nelson asked for the death penalty to be reconsidered, as he was not mentally competent. Ted was examined by Dorothy Lewis. Despite his insistence that he was competent, the judge in the case ruled that he was the most competent serial killer in the country at this time. During the initial trial, Ted Bundy acted as his own lawyer and would refer to himself in the third person. Bundy would use any opportunity to speak to the press. He famously addressed the press as his indictment was read out and said, "My chance to talk to the press, I'll plead not guilty right now." Bundy spent years appealing his death sentence and offered further information on other crimes to cause delays. Execution of Ted Bundy. Ted Bundy was executed in the electric chair on January 24th, 1989. He had exhausted all of the available appeals. Ted Bundy's execution brought a huge crowd chanting, hold banners, and sell merchandise, including the famous "Burn Bundy Burn" t-shirt. Ted Bundy's last words were, "Jim and Fred, I like you to give my love to my family and friends." Ted Bundy's final meal was steak, eggs, hash browns, eggs, toast, milk, and juice. He was served a standard last meal after he declined to choose a special meal, and he also declined to eat the above. In his will, Ted Bundy asked not to be buried. He asked for his body to be cremated and for his remains to be scattered over Cascade Mountains in Washington, the location that many of his victims' remains were discovered. Ted Bundy had a good level of education, having studied Chinese and sociology before graduating with a degree in psychology from the University of Washington. Ted Bundy worked alongside Anne Rule on a suicide hotline in Seattle when Bundy was training to be a social worker. Anne would later write a biography on Bundy called The Stranger Beside Me. Ted Bundy led a normal life. He was in committed relationships throughout his killing spree. Elizabeth Crawford became suspicious when he would go out at night. She reported him to the police multiple times during 1974, but her reports were not taken seriously until 2 years later. She wrote a book about the relationship called The Phantom Prince: My Life with Ted Bundy. Ted Bundy married Carol Ann Boone, who Ted started dating in 1994. They married in 1980 during his trial after Ted proposed to her while she was under oath as a witness for his defense. Carol Boone later divorced Ted in 1986 when she no longer believed he was innocent. Ted Bundy had a daughter named Rose, who was conceived while he was on death row. Rose was born on October 24, 1981. Rose is often referred to as Rosa, and Red sleuths have come up with a number of possible women who could be Ted Bundy's child, includes a Rosa Johnson, Abigail Griffin, and more. Ted Bundy did not have a son, but he said to be very close to Carol's son. Bundy had a poor upbringing and a troubled childhood. Ted Bundy blamed porn, his addiction to hardcore pornography, and his childhood for his crimes. But Ted Bundy's mother, Eleanor Lewis Cowell, supported him and claimed his innocence throughout the trial. Ted Bundy and Diane Edwards, aka Stephanie Brooks, met and dated in college. She broke his heart, and it is believed a number of her victims bear her resemblance, as he never got over the failed relationship. Media. Netflix released a Ted Bundy documentary called Conversations with a Killer. The Ted Bundy tapes in January 2019. The Ted Bundy tapes is a 4-part documentary covering the trial and future interviews. Footage that includes the James Thompson interview with Ted Bundy, the final interview before execution. Some of the footage of Ted Bundy's in court is truly chilling, and I highly recommend watching. Netflix also released Extremely Wicked, Shockingly Evil, and Via Will Scene Ted Bundy playing by Zac Efron. The feature-length Ted Bundy movie and dramatization was released in May 2019. The Ted Bundy car was the famous Volkswagen Beetle that he owned while at college in Utah. The Ted Bundy car is on display at the Alcatraz East Crime Museum in Pigeon Forge, Tennessee. Occasionally, memorabilia such as the original Ted Bundy letter will come up for sale, and they often sell for thousands of dollars. There have been number of books and articles published, including Ted Bundy, Conversation with a Killer, The Death Row Interview. Some of the researchers were a reading included many of the research papers and the analysis of Ted Bundy's handwriting. Thanks for watching my podcast. Please like, subscribe, and comment.